I look forward to the testimony today. I'll just speak for myself here. I've come to conclude that climate change is real, that human emissions create greenhouse gas effect that traps heat, and that you see a rise in the oceans and acidity in the water and droughts and disruption of weather patterns. That makes sense to me. I've been to Norway with Senator McCain, Greenland, I think, with Senator McCain and Senator Clinton at the time, and Alaska. The native people in those regions have seen a dramatic change. So count me in on the idea that the science is real. The solutions, I think, are becoming more obvious to me. There are three areas of carbon emissions, basically, in our lives: transportation, power production, and living, homes and offices. So we have some folks from Johnson & Johnson are going to tell us about how we can lower emissions through energy efficiency, that we can have toasters and thermostats and every kind of device we use daily can be more energy efficient, lowering the cost to consumer and lowering demand on production. Count me in for that. Weatherizing buildings, having the buildings of the future, maybe have solar panels on top of our houses. It's just endless opportunities in the office space, consumer utilization, and home living that would be a win for the climate, for the environment, as well as the consumer in terms of lowering cost. It's taken an investment, but I think it'd be an investment worth making. On power production, wind and solar's footprint is getting bigger. There are all kind of new technologies coming on board that are clean in nature. I think natural gas is a bridge fuel. I think natural gas has a lower component. To our friends in the coal world, I met a gentleman a couple of days ago who believes that coal can be transformed, not burned, to create a product that will go into electric vehicles, batteries. So I'm trying to make this, I'm trying to be creative. On the transportation side, nuclear power is a big deal for me. It's clean in its emission, but we have a storage problem of spent fuel, and I think there's ways we can deal with that. On the transportation side, probably the most exciting of all, Mr. Chairman, is that all the major car manufacturers have said that they're going to go to an electric vehicle fleet by 2035, 2040. So I would like to sit down with the chairman and other Democrats to see if we could redesign the Highway Trust Fund. Electric vehicles are not paying into the trust fund. I was told yesterday that the Biden administration opposes an increase in the gas tax. Well, I'm a Republican, but we've increased gas taxes at home in South Carolina because the Highway Trust Fund has a huge deficit. And I know it's a regressive tax, but there's ways maybe we can do rebates. So count me in for accelerating the electrification of the transportation system. You may have hydrogen-fueled vehicles that do not emit CO2. So there's a lot of things going on, and one of the roles that we can play at the federal level is to encourage these developments through research and development. Bill Gates, I've talked to extensively. He thinks that the major thing that the government can do is create some robust funding for R&D and let the private sector sort of flourish. Now, when you say we, I hope you mean India and China, because we, the family of nations here, doesn't do much good for us to do all this if other people don't follow. But to my Republican colleagues, it's just a matter of time until most cars, I don't know how long I'm going to live, but this century for sure, that most vehicles will be running on something other than gasoline. I've talked to the fossil fuel industry. I find them very open to change. They just want to be able to manage that change. It'll be a while before we get away from gas-driven cars, and we're going to need gas as a transportation fuel as possible. Natural gas as a heating source is very, very much with us. So count me in for exploring clean energy, but thinking outside the box what that would include, algae and nuclear power. So just end with this. I've tried to learn about the problem and realize that what we do here has to be done in a fashion to not destroy our economy in the name of a great cause. Other people have to come on board too. I've tried to be rational about threats. I think climate change is a real threat to our way of life. I think over time, the way we've lived has caused this problem, and we can find a way to live a different way that's good for the environment and would be good for job creation. From a foreign policy point of view, imagine the world where fossil fuels were not so readily available to rogue regimes. Imagine a world where the Iranian Ayatollah couldn't rely on oil production as almost 90% of his income. The Russians. I find it kind of interesting that the foreign policy consequences of moving to a clean energy business footprint would change the geopolitics of the world dramatically. Most of the bad actors out there depend on fossil fuels for their revenue. So that's a side of it that I think we need to talk more about. And finally, threats. My Democratic colleagues are telling me that the planet will cease to exist as we know it in a decade. Maybe so. I'm not so sure I'm sold on that, but I'm definitely sold on the problem of climate change being real, and the sooner we address it, the better. And I just wish you had the same attitude about Afghanistan. We're down to 2,500 troops, and we're going to withdraw them all, and radical Islam is going to come roaring back unattended. And we know what they can do if nobody's watching them. So I find it disappointing that we can't look at threats rationally across the board, Mr. Chairman. For a relatively small investment compared to the past, we can make sure that al-Qaeda and ISIS never comes back to receive sanctuary in Afghanistan. And here's what I want to remind you of. Climate change is real. The devastation of the planet is definitely happening. At what rate, we can debate, but it's real. If they could get a nuclear weapon, ISIS and al-Qaeda, would they use it? Yes. If they could find a way to do something other than fly planes into buildings to kill more of us, would they? Yeah. That threat is really real, and we're basically leaving it unattended. So count me in for dealing with threats across the board, rationally, the lowest cost possible, the least disruption possible, the least wear and tear on our military. But ignoring a threat, Mr. Chairman, doesn't make it go away. Count me in working with you to deal with the threat the planet faces from climate change. I hope you and your colleagues on the other side will look at threats that radical Islam present to the nation and the world writ large and see if our policies make sense.